Navigation. Click the Pan button in the toolbar to pan around the displayed data. Click the Fly button in the toolbar to continuously move in any direction. Click the Scroll View button in the toolbar to display one section of a dataset at a time in a vertical or horizontal direction. For example, suppose that the upper left corner of an image is displayed in the image window. The overview shows the extent of the current view, in yellow. Cursor value. The cursor value dialog contains information about the displayed data at the current cursor location and data from the mensuration tool when applicable. Select Display a cursor value from the menu bar, or click the Cursor Value button in the toolbar. If multiple data layers are open, click the Show Info for Top Layer Only button to display cursor value information for the top layer only. Disable the button to show cursor value information for all available layers. The cursor value dialog does not report any information during a view portal, blend, flicker, or swipe process. Images. For all images, the cursor value dialog reports the name of each layer. For non-georeferenced images, it reports the following information for the current location. File X, Y coordinates, in pixels. Data values for the bands displayed. You can change the precision of floating point data values using the Data Precision in Cursor Value preference. You can change the reporting of data values from floating point to scientific notation using the Data Notation in Cursor Value preference. Class names for classification images. For georeferenced images, the cursor value dialog reports the following information for the current location. Latitude and longitude values. Map X, easting, and Y, northing, coordinates. Military Grid Reference System, Monsignors, coordinates. Map projection and datum, and whether the file contains rational polynomial coefficients, RPCS. File X, Y coordinates, in pixels. Data values for the bands displayed. Rotate. Use the following tools to rotate your display. Zoom. Use the following tools to zoom in or out of the display. Zoom in on the display. Do one of the following. Click and drag over an area to draw a rubber band box and zoom in on that area. Click once in the display to center the display on that location and zoom in by a fixed percentage. To exit this tool, click the Select button. Fixed Zoom In. Click this button to zoom into the center of the display by a fixed percentage. The default is 1.25x, which can be set using the zoom factor preference. Fixed Zoom Out. Click this button to zoom out from the center of the display by a fixed percentage. The default is 1.25x, which can be set using the zoom factor preference. Zoom to full extent. Click this button to zoom the full extent of the data layer. Go to. Use the Go to tool to jump to a specific location in an image and to center the current view over that location. Go to tool. Enter the coordinates in the Go to field, using one of the entry formats in the table below. You can also copy a location from the cursor value window and paste it in the Go to field. Press Enter. Mensuration. Use the mensuration tool to measure distance and azimuth direction on an image. Use the mensuration tool in combination with the region of interest tool to measure distance for polyline, polygon, rectangle, and ellipse ROIs, and area for polygon, rectangle, and ellipse ROIs. Click the mensuration button on the toolbar to toggle on the mensuration and polyline annotation tools, then draw a polyline on the image to calculate distance and direction, degrees relative to north. The distance and direction display in the cursor value window. The polyline annotation tool is enabled by default when you select mensuration. To use arrows instead of polylines for mensuration, click the arrow annotation tool on the toolbar. Multi-segment polylines calculate and display distance for each segment as well as the total distance of the entire polyline. For geographic lat LON images, distance is calculated using the average latitude between the two endpoints of the line being measured. Toggle off mensuration, click the mensuration button on the toolbar. Enhancement tools. Enhancement tools interactively control the amount of brightness, contrast, stretch, and transparency for the selected image layer. For each tool, click and drag the slider or enter a value in the adjacent field. You can also use the following to change slider values. Click on the slider bar to the right or left of the indicator or click the slider, then use the page up or page down keys to move the slider value up or down incrementally by 10. Click on the icons to the right or left of the slider bar or click the slider, then use the arrow keys on the keyboard to move the slider value up or down incrementally by 1. The up right arrow keys increase the enhancement, the left down arrow keys decrease it. Click the slider, then use the home key to move the slider to 100 and the end key to move the slider to 0. Click the reset button for the tool to return to the default value. Click the undo or redo buttons, or select edit undo action or edit a redo action from the menu bar to undo and redo actions. The value in the adjacent field interactively updates as you move the slider using any of the options listed, and the view immediately shows the results. Tip: if the enhancement tools are not fully visible, increase the size of the ENVI window. Stretch. You can apply different stretch types to enhance the appearance of an image. Default stretch types. If the associated header file for an image specifies a default stretch, that stretch is applied when you open the image. If the header file does not specify a stretch, then a stretch type is applied as follows. No stretch is applied to 8-bit byte data. An optimized linear stretch is applied to 16-bit unsigned integer data. A linear 2% stretch is applied to all other data types. You can set the default stretch for these data types using the default stretch preferences. Apply stretches. To apply a different stretch, select an option from the stretch types drop-down list. No stretch does not apply a stretch. Linear, linear 1%, linear 2%, and linear 5% apply a % linear stretch. To apply a different % linear stretch, click the histogram stretch interactive stretch button. Optimized linear applies an optimized linear stretch, also known as a dynamic range adjustment. By default, 16-bit, unsigned integer data use the optimized linear stretch for display as it has a dynamic range set that is optimal for integer data. This stretch provides the maximum amount of information from the midtones and from the shadow and highlight regions of this data type. Equalization applies a histogram equalization stretch. Gaussian applies a Gaussian stretch. The default standard deviation value is 0.3. To apply a different standard deviation, click the Histogram Stretch Interactive Stretch button. Square root performs a square root grayscale transformation, then applied a linear stretch. Logarithmic logarithmically stretches the grayscale of the input image. It is a nonlinear technique where the low-range brightness is enhanced. The logarithmic stretch is useful for enhancing features lying in the darker parts of the original image. Bipolar computes the absolute value of the pixels corresponding to the 2% and 98% locations on the negative and positive sides of the histogram, then assigns the greater absolute value to both ends of the stretch. See bipolar stretch for details. If the data does not include both positive and negative values, this stretch will have no effect. Click the Reset Stretch Type Reset button to return to the default stretch type for the image. Histogram stretch. Use the histogram stretch controls to adjust minimum and maximum histogram values for red, green or blue, or a single band, in the current layer. As with stretch types, you can calculate statistics on the full extent of the image, or only the extent that is visible in the current view. Tip: if a pyramid file does not exist and downsampling is not available for the input raster, the histogram stretch will not be available for use. Click the Histogram Stretch button Interactive Stretch button on the toolbar to open the Histogram Stretch dialog. Here are some tips for working in the Histogram Stretch dialog. For color images, the dialog contains a histogram of all three bands and shows their minimum and maximum values. For single-band images, the dialog contains a histogram of the band and shows its minimum and maximum values. Drag the minimum and maximum vertical sliders as needed in the red, green, and blue histograms. Or, type minimum and maximum values in the fields provided and press the Enter key. You can enter a custom clip percentage in the field provided for each histogram. Or enter a clip percentage to apply to all histograms, using the field at the bottom of the dialog. To reset the plot range to the original view, click the Reset Plot Range button. Status bar. The status bar is the horizontal bar at the bottom of the ENVI interface. Georeferenced files. For georeferenced files, the status bar displays the following information about the base layer in the Layer Manager. Latitude and longitude of the current location of the cursor in degrees in minutes seconds, dynamically updating as the cursor moves. Projection and datum. Military Grid Reference System Monsignors, coordinates. The status bar displays information as you hover the cursor over either the overview or the current view.